Hi. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I'm super excited to be here. Thanks to Daniel and Matt and everybody who's put everything together. So when I wrote this talk, I have a bad habit of proposing talks before I actually write them. So this one is API all the things because I'm super excited about the project that I'm evangelizing, and I just want to write an API for everything, which I'll get into in a little bit. But as I started putting this together, I realized that it's kind of a little bit more about my journey as a JavaScript engineer. And as I talk to more people, they're like, "Oh, you should definitely talk about your story." So it's kind of my talk is sort of evolved into my journey plus plus. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'll show you some of the API stuff. So I'm a developer evangelist with the Strong Loop team at IBM. Has anybody ever heard of Strong Loop? Okay, a few people, great. I'll give you a little background real quickly. They started out writing a lot of Node open source stuff. They ended up taking over Express.js. They wrote Loopback, which is built on top of Express. Early on, of the 8 core contributors, 4 of them were Strong Loop founders and engineers. And I'm pretty sure one of them wrote libuv, which is the event loop in Node. So they've been deep in Node since early on. IBM bought them about I think a year ago, maybe a little bit more than a year ago. And the Loopback product that they have, the open source, I shouldn't call it a product, the project, worked perfectly it made sense for IBM because they had this API lifecycle management tool, but it didn't have the create part, and that's what Loopback does. So IBM incorporated Loopback into their tooling, and the great part about that is Loopback is still open source, but it is fully backed by IBM. There's a whole team of engineers that are working on it. We just released version 3 maybe a month or so ago, and I hope I'm not getting ahead of myself, but one of the things that I've encountered in my role as an evangelist is a little bit of confusion around Loopback, Strong Loop, and then now IBM's API Connect. And part of that is you used to do npm install Strong Loop to get Loopback, and so people would get confused about that. So I worked hard with the team to clarify that story, and just about a week ago we released Loopback CLI, which is now the preferred way to use Loopback. And the Strong Loop NPM project is kind of being phased out. So that's kind of my quick spiel. Sorry, I'm turning off notifications so that nobody bothers me while I'm doing this. There it is. And so my talk. In telling my story, I wanted to kind of have a couple of takeaways. Or at least I realized that there were some takeaways. I hesitate to call them morals or lessons or whatever, but I realized these as I went through my journey that I think are important. So take on new challenges. Don't be afraid to see new opportunities, go after them, be open to new opportunities. Everyone is unique in their experiences, and they bring something to the table. So remember that about yourself, and remember that about other people. Embrace your shortcomings and consider them opportunities to expand and grow. And drive for diversity and quality in your team, and in your community, which I think is really important. And it's one of the things that I love about the JavaScript community is they're very passionate about that. And speaking of, nurture your community, be a part of it. Try to help it grow and help it to be better. And of course, JavaScript is awesome. So I'm going to start kind of early on. So give me a moment. I kind of like to tell stories every time I'm at band practice, and I'm like, "Oh, did I tell you that story about?" And they're like, "Oh, not again. Here he goes." So this is me in the red shirt. I was kind of a punk metalhead. I think this was the day that Metallica's Master of Puppets came out, if I remember correctly. We were really excited. But I kind of share this because I was sort of a punk, but I did really well in school. I got all A's. I aced tests, even though I missed the maximum amount of days and generally was really screwing off a lot. So I did really well in high school despite my best efforts. but I didn't really have any plans. And this guy, the blonde-haired guy over there, we played in a band together, and he's like, his brother went to school in Boise, and he's like, oh, it's so great out there. It's sunny, and it's so much fun. And we should move out there and start a band. And I don't know who actually does that, but well, I guess I know now. We do. So we moved out to Boise together and started a band. And that's me in the really goofy hat there. So as you can probably tell from this photo, like things didn't change too much with moving to Boise. We started bands out there. But the reason why I wanted to kind of start from back here is one that, I tried to go to college, and I was living with punk rockers, and it's sort of the two things didn't work out too well. So I gave up on the college part and stayed with the punk rock. And I guess the point is actually, when I was thinking about the talk this morning, my brain does this funny thing where it'll inject a relevant song into it, and then when I realize it, I kind of laugh at myself. This morning it injected the Edie Brickell song, and it's what was the part now? I'm not aware of too many things, but I know what I know, if you know what I mean. So that's kind of where I was. I was just sort of figuring things out. But the great thing about being in Boise and my time there was that even though it's this small town in Idaho, which actually when I told all my friends I was moving there, they're like, Boise, Iowa? Why would you move to Iowa? That's so weird. There was this amazing community there. It was a music community, but we all lived together. We all played shows together. There was kind of a diversity of bands. There was a band that sounded kind of like The Cure. We sounded kind of like Tool. There's a band called Built to Spill that we all lived together and rehearsed in the same space. And my bandmates ran the All Ages Club, and when they were on tour, or my roommates, and when they were on tour, I would run it. And so there was this amazing community, and we all worked together, even though we were kind of all a little different, and we all really supported each other. And so, that was kind of my first taste of what a really good community was like. And I'll skip a little ways. I have years up there too. So this is 1999, roughly speaking, to about 2003. I had played with some guys in Olympia, Washington, and then they moved to Chicago, and they're like, you should come back to Chicago. You should come to Chicago. We're going to start a band. So I was still pretty aimless. So I'm like, all right, cool. But our drummer, his dad managed a bank or something, and he's like, you're great at drums, and that's fun, but you should probably really get a job or something. And we all lived together still. So he got this job. He decided to go to take classes to learn COBOL because this is 1999, and I don't know, does anybody remember the Y2K kind of scare? It was going to take down the whole world. Never really happened. So he says to me, I'm going to take these classes, and if you want to join with me, I'll pay for them, and then when you get a good job, which are inevitable to get by learning COBOL, he said that to me, you can pay me back when you get this job, right? And I was like, it doesn't sound really that interesting, so I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to pass. But what's funny about that is he did the classes, and after he got out of school, he actually got a really good job with Discover Financial, and brought home a laptop. And as I was showing earlier, playing in bands and stuff, I wasn't home tinkering on my Atari or taking computers apart or anything. I was out just causing trouble. So when he brought this laptop home, I was like, oh, what's this internet thing? How does this work? What's the big deal with the internet? And the really eye-opening thing for me was when I found View Source. I don't know if I was just looking through the menus. I was like, oh, what does that mean? And I was on a simple web page, and the source code came up, and I looked at it and said, oh, I can make sense of this. There's nothing too fancy. And I mean, this was a long time ago, so it wasn't like I was looking at Gmail or something. So sort of a light went off, this isn't magical, this is something that I could learn, and it's kind of really interesting. So I started to read some books and was looking at taking some classes. What was kind of interesting was that my band was about to go on tour, and I got this job offer to be a roving internet music journalist for this brand new website. which was like perfect because I was going on tour and I was going to be meeting bands every night. And so my job was to go and talk to bands, interview them, and then get them to give me an MP3 and we would put up on the website. This is like the time of Napster and stuff, so MP3s were like, oh, you have an MP3? So that was like perfect. And so I'm driving around, we're on tour, I'm doing this job, I'm literally taking photos with an analog camera because digital cameras weren't really a thing then, and then like going to the drugstore and mailing them to this place in Seattle. And at the same time, I'm sitting in the back of the band van driving around reading like about Mac OS 9 and you know, HTML4 or whatever. And so it was a really interesting time in my life because all these kind of things were sort of converging. And so after that, I was building a lot of websites for like my bands, my friends' bands, and stuff like that. And obviously, you don't make very much money doing that. But I realized that you could actually get a job doing this stuff. And again, this is, 2004 roughly, so it's still kind of early on. At least in my journey as a web developer. But this first job that I got, it's really crazy. And this what I'm about to tell you is in the span of about 6 months. I'm pretty sure that this web design company was a mafia front for this place in Chicago. Because so when I walk in the door, there are about 15 to 20 developers, designers, mostly front-end people, and like 20 or 30 salespeople. And they would get they'd sign people on, they'd get their half the money up front, and they didn't care what happened. And all the developers had like 10 to 12 projects that they were trying to manage all at different phases. And I got in there, and the 10 that they dropped on me, everybody was super mad. And I actually got a few of them turned around, and they saw that, and they're like, "Oh, maybe you're kind of good at this. You should like run the team and make sure that nobody's mad." And so this is my first job, and they basically told me to start running the development team. And then we moved to another office, and then we moved to a third office. This third one was above a meat packing facility, and it really stunk. And at this time, I'd been really trying, again, this is a really short time frame. I'm trying to fight for these engineers who are trying to build these things and super overworked and not getting paid much. And the checks started to bounce. And so I'm arguing with them, like, you can't do this. And it got to the point where, we couldn't even go to like the check currency place, the cash place where you can just cash any old check. Like they knew this company and nobody in town in Chicago would cash these checks. So it got really crazy. And, the girl I was dating at the time, who's now my wife, was like, "You've got to get out of there." Literally, like the police would come in often, and attorneys, and the day that I went in to quit, some other guy quit and like grabbed a computer and ran out the door, and somebody chased him and tackled him. It was just like insanity for 6 months. And then one little interesting tidbit, and I'm trying to not go off on tangents because I like to tell stories, but a couple of years later, I can't remember exactly, but I remember hearing about the FBI tracking down this like number 2 or number 3 guy in Anonymous. And I see the picture, and it's Jeffrey Hammond, and I used to work with him at Cherry One. I wasn't going to say the name of the place, but at this place. So I Googled them before I wrote this talk. I was like, oh, they're still in business. Wow. And so, yeah, I knew when I worked with him that he was super smart, like low-level, hacking on stuff, but I didn't realize he was going to go on do crazy stuff. Anyway, so that was really an interesting first job in the web development field. And my second job, strangely, I went to this media company, and they gave me this fancy, shiny title of new media director. But basically, there were 4 of us, and I was the only one doing web stuff. And so they're like, "Well, we'll give you this fancy title." But I was still doing mostly static stuff. I remember I had just moved from actually at the previous place, I had learned about CSS and got away from like tables for layouts. Who was here has like used the table for layout back in the day? Okay, great. Wow. That's really surprising. Part of what I wanted to mention about this time of my life is that I remember the guy who's playing drums in my band, who I worked with at the previous place, messaged me and said, did you hear the news? This thing called Prototype and Scriptaculous was just released, and you got to see it. It's crazy. And I got on the website, and like you could drag and drop. You can see some of the things here, like auto completion live demo and shopping cart live demo, and drag and drop. And it sounds really silly now, but it was like mind blowing at the time. It was like, you can do this with JavaScript? This is crazy. Because it was really a serious bastard child back then. So it started to open my eyes, like, oh wow, like you can do some really cool stuff. And so from there, I went to a little place called Sears. Has anyone ever, like, when I was younger, I remember going through the catalog and circling things for like my Christmas list. All right, cool. This is great. A lot of you folks are on the same page. So I went and worked at Sears, which sounds like really stuffy and goofy, but this was downtown Chicago, and it was on this pet project of the CEO. And the team that I joined was about 20 or so, and this is in 2006. They were trying to fully embrace Agile, which this was really early in kind of Agile catching on. And they were really forward-thinking in the tools that they were using and the technologies that they were using. Ruby on Rails had come out fairly recently, or at least was getting popular, and this was a Java shop, so they were doing JRuby on Rails. jQuery had come out fairly recently in my time there. And so like we were adopting all these really cool things. Third-party APIs were just starting to kind of become a thing too. So it was really exciting to go there and work with this amazing team. And it was sort of like talking about finding the music community in Boise. I had now found like this really cool development community within this team. And we did a lot of pair programming. We did a lot of like brown bag lunches. And it really like stuck with me. And like when I left there, everywhere I went, I was trying to either find or see like a seed of where I could help build that feeling again, because it was really fantastic. And interestingly, the team that I worked with was mostly a company called Optiva of consultants and ThoughtWorks. And Optiva got acqui-hired by Groupon and basically went on to build Groupon. And if you want to know stories about Andrew Mason, I knew him before Groupon, and I've got a couple for you. But to stay on track here, so a couple other quick ones that I went through. I was at IAC, which owns like Match and Vimeo and a bunch of other cool properties. There I learned how to build like a UI platform of microsites, which was fun. I worked at this really stupid startup for a while, so I learned how to not run a startup there. And then I wanted to get to the Credit Suisse part because I went to work there as a consultant for about a year, and they actually hired me they had this Java application that they had been writing for 10 years, and it was basically like Google or Excel Google spreadsheets on like steroids, and it did all this crazy stuff with live financial data, and analysts could go in there and write formulas and come up with interesting things through it. And they built me to convert that to a web app, like literally just me. And I remember like sitting down in my cubicle and my boss coming over and sitting down and like, all right, let's do this. Come on, let's start building this. And I'm just like, okay, import jQuery. It was just really bizarre. And I felt this overwhelming sense of like, what did I get myself into? Luckily, I convinced them very quickly that this was crazy. And they hired a team of like 20 or 30 people from Lab 49, which is another really great company of consultants to come in. And they were agile and they had product people and, really using forward-thinking technologies again. So I just kind of like secretly just went over and sat with them and became one of them for my time there. But again, like I found a really good group of people who were doing really awesome things. They were really smart and they were really happy to share things. So I was happy about that. But as soon as they left, when the project was done, I got the heck out of there too. And I went to this place, which is actually right there. I was standing there at the table, and it's like, oh, I can see where I used to sit, which is actually just on the other side of the building. So I got to go work at the New York Times, which I was super excited about, and I thought I would actually retire there. My first password was NYT, retiree. I was super excited. And I had actually interviewed there a while before that, and didn't get in. So when I finally got in, I thought I had made it. But when I got there, it was really interesting. There were some really amazing good things there and some amazingly bad things there. So, for example, my first task was the paywall was a thing. It was fairly new, but it was a thing. And they realized that they were doing the paywall check after they had loaded the content. And so if you let the content load and hit escape, you could read the page and the paywall check would never happen. What's that? Yeah, well, I fixed that. So that was my first task, was to fix that. And it was really kind of rudimentary. I just disabled the escape key, and then once it was done loading, I re-enabled it to try and not be a jerk about that. But I really fully tested it because it affected every single page on the New York Times, which is crazy. And so I went to my manager and was like, okay, I'm pretty sure this is going to be great. We didn't have any testing or anything like that. So I'm like, I think it's ready to go. And he's like, okay, so just log into the website and just FTP that file up there. And I literally was like, holy cow, are you serious? So that was totally mind blowing to me. Granted, I was there for a couple of years, and by the time I left, we had replatformed the site and were using more modern things and had everything kind of in place. But what's interesting is the things that I was talking about and fighting for on day one was what we had gotten to by the time I had left. And so that was part of the reason why I decided to move on. I wanted to go somewhere where I would be more challenged and kind of be a little more ahead of the game, I guess. But I don't blame them, because before that replatforming, basically when you published a page, you were printing a page and putting it on the web. You wouldn't go back and change it unless something critical was wrong. And so the newsroom, which was down, it's actually behind the building, but the second, third, and fourth floor, and the digital platform is up on the 8th, 9th, and 10th floor. And so we were really separated. And when they would do a story, they would build it so that it would last forever. And so they would have a version of jQuery that they wanted to rely on. We would have our version of jQuery. We also had a version of Prototype because we weren't able to take it out because it would break older pages that were relying on it. So there would be instances where we would have 2, 3, 4 versions of jQuery, Prototype, and all this crazy stuff. And I will go on one quick tangent. I remember when I first started there, I went to an HTML5 O'Reilly conf, and Steve Souders was talking. And of course, it's a huge room, and everybody's there because he's amazing web performance guy. And he goes, okay, well, let's look at the New York Times. And I just started, and I'm like, no, don't view the source, because it was the maximum amount of scripts that you could include at the top of the page. It was just so bad. So I was sweating. And luckily, he was just showing that, if you have ads and you don't do them right, they can block your content, especially, if you're in China, and they, there was a number of things he was talking about. But luckily, he didn't, really look at the code, so that was crisis averted. But when we started to work on that replatforming, which was great, we were doing some really smart stuff with Require and able to work with the newsroom team to allow them to pin it to different versions, but we could increment, and we could manage that in a smart way. So we were moving on to really good things, but we were talking about using Node for kind of the backend there are multiple backends in terms of this publishing system, but in terms of delivering the web pages and stuff. So it was really exciting that we're talking about Node. But then, and I've told this story to a lot of people, and they're always like, oh, that happened to me too. We're looking at Node, and the person who makes the decision looks around and says, but look at all these PHP engineers. What am I going to... And they're like, oh, let's just do it in PHP. It'll be fine. And so it was like, Node.js, Nope.js. But the other thing I wanted to talk about with the New York Times was, when I got there, I saw a real great opportunity to kind of build on that community. There was some community there, but there are so many great engineers there and so many people that I really enjoyed working with that I started to do a Thursday lunch and learn, JavaScript lunch and learn, and I did it for over a year and only missed 1 or 2 weeks. I sourced most of the talks from internal. I had some external people, but it was primarily internal, which was great when you have David Nolan, who does ClojureScript, and Jeremy Ashkenas, who does all the other things. So we had a really great pool of people to pull from, but it was a very popular thing. The conference room was always packed, and the CTO who I became good friends with, was just really thrilled that we had that going. And I expanded it to this coding in the afternoon thing, where we would take one of the big conference rooms on the newsroom floor. It's right over there. And we would all code in the afternoon together. And, you still had to do your work. You couldn't cancel meetings or whatever. But if you had the afternoon free, which everybody tried to do, we'd go there, we'd put Turntable FM up on the screen, and we'd all make fun of each other's music choices. And it was just a really great community. I was really excited about it. And Rajiv, the CTO, tried to formalize that as a role for me, like part-time DevRel and part-time engineer. Unfortunately, they went into a hiring freeze and we weren't able to do it. I have this great email from him where he's cursing about it, and he's a really mild-mannered guy, so it was very sweet, I guess. I don't know. So that was really cool. It was really great being there, but I ended up moving on at that point. That was is that coming up? Oh yeah. So that was my little joke about Nope.js. Funny thing is, they're now rewriting a lot of that PHP stuff in Node. A friend of mine who's still there is kind of leading that effort. So that's also a common story in my. I'll tell that last story some other time. Then I went on to another couple of startups, and I realized when I started writing this talk that I've never had any luck at a startup. I've always had a really terrible time, and I know a lot of people that work at startups, and that's great, so I'm not knocking them. But I realized my experience was never good at startups. They were always run by crazy people. And maybe it's just good crazy people and bad crazy people, and I got the bad ones. I shouldn't use the term crazy, but you know what I mean. So then I went to Behance, which is owned by Adobe. And I learned a couple of things there. Some of them I won't get into, but one of the important ones was rolling your own JavaScript frameworks is typically a really bad idea. I used to work with Rachel there. We kvetch about this time in our lives regularly. It teaches you a lot. I learned so much about JavaScript by using these frameworks, but it teaches you a lot the hard way. Like, everything you learn is really difficult because there's no Stack Overflow for our frameworks. Can't Google it. What's that? Yeah. Oh, the code and the guy who wrote it, and God bless him. We're still friends and I love him. But he prided himself on being really clever. So he would do everything in one line if he could, and he would bitwise, yeah, you know what I'm talking about. It was just mind-numbing. And so we learned everything the hard way, whatever we did learn. I also learned that leadership is really critical. And as I wrote this talk to you, I realized that I really learned it here, but I looked back at the other places and saw that that's just like super true everywhere I went. Where I had great leadership, it was really a great experience and everything went well. But interestingly, I had a perfect job offer lead to a perfect job offer. And that's another thing that Alex taught me, the JavaScript framework guy, is tautological. Now I use tautologies like all the time. And so they made this job offer to, checking my time here, to be part-time engineer, part-time engineering manager, and part-time developer relations, because I was doing a lot of that sort of stuff there as well. Except every time I would talk to my manager about it, maybe 40% engineering, 40% management, or 30% management, 30% DevRel. And she would say, yeah, that sounds ideal, but I still kind of need you to do 90% engineering. And so that kind of didn't really work out. But it made me realize that I wanted to find like my perfect role. And so I imagined it, and I tell all the people that all my friends that are looking to change jobs to imagine what would be the perfect role for you. And so I did that, and I wanted to do DevRel. I'm kind of speeding up because I know I'm running a little long. Remote. I wanted to do JavaScript work. I wanted to still keep coding. I wanted to focus on open source, and I wanted to work at like a good company. I was tired of startups already. And strangely, I found all of those things in this role at StrongLoop. And it was so perfect. I was like, this isn't going to work out. There's no way that they're going to hire me. But they did. And now I'm all those things, including full stack. And that's Frankie. I just put that in last night. Yeah, Frankie. And so I can get back to the takeaways, but we kind of went over them in the beginning, so I'm kind of just breezing through them. I think hopefully they kind of made sense. So now I do DevRel stuff. I talk about things and stuff. Primarily Loopback, which I'm going to call David up now. As I think I kind of mentioned earlier, Loopback is built on top of Express. It's rapid API development. Welcome to my colleague David Oken, hi everyone. He's a fellow evangelist. And so yeah, you can get out of that. You know what? Let me just quickly do, because they want to capture the screen. Don't do that. And I think it's Command Option New, Recording, Screen, and I just didn't hit that button. I'm sorry. That's the third one in a row. So we have that up there, right? Can everybody see that? So Loopback is rapid API development, and we're going to do that really quickly. So start a Loopback app. Don't make it there. Just LP. We just did this last night, so we were kind of ribbing each other. So Loopback has Yeoman built into it, and you can go ahead and start whatever sort of app you want. Of course, he's going to do a Bears API. Yeoman is a scaffolding generator, and so I'll point out it just asks you these series of questions and builds this stuff out for you. So we got a Bears API. It creates the directory. We choose the latest version of Loopback. We choose an API server because it gives us some stuff out of the box. And if you want, let's see how quick this goes. It's kind of actually not too bad. So it scaffolds out these files for us, which is basically a Loopback server on top of Express. So a lot of the Express stuff is sort of under the hood. And if you want to cancel out of this and just CD into the cats directory, because cats are better than bears, I've already done Loopback application in there. So if we do LB model, we'll start building our API layer. So again, it just walks you through these questions. So we'll do a cat API. We're going to do an in-memory data store, but there are all these connectors for all these conventional data stores, MongoDB, whatnot. And there are community-supported ones for the edge ones like GraphQL or Neo4j. So we're going to expose it through the public API. It's great with plurals. You can even put like mouse in there. It'll do mice. So typically don't have to do custom. We'll do a common server model. Now we're going to go through some properties, whatever, name and is friendly is fine. So it'll ask you, what type it's required, default values blank. He's going to do an is friendly, which is Boolean. It's required, but it defaults to false because of insurance reasons. We don't want people to approach cats who are not friendly.
Bears are better in my experience.
Yeah, well, bears are less friendly. Except the waving ones, right? So when you hit enter when you're done, you can basically just run node. Gives you this sweet output. You can get right into your API Explorer. And if he clicks on cat, we have this full API built. We haven't written any code. This is interactive CLI. If you're prototyping, this is like, boom, you're off to the races. You can build whatever the heck you want. So this is just our API. Let's go ahead and put some data in here. You might need to, yeah. So there we go. If you click that, it fills it in here. So you can use this Swagger API Explorer to start adding data to your data store. We're using in memory, so this will go away when we're done. But you could write it to a file, or you could use a real data store. So here's our response code, our response body, and now if we go up to the get and we run that, we'll see that we get our response, we get our 200. Like we've written zero code, but will you show the code real quickly?
Absolutely.
So if you quit out and just say Atom dot, don't do it that way. I know you don't use Vim, so I have Atom in there for you. So if you open up common models and open the JSON. So this is what it's scaffolded out, and this is what Loopback uses to use your API. You can see here, you can use the CLI to build out ACLs, relations, and stuff. But if I didn't want this required, I just delete that line. If I want a different one, default, like it's what I love about Loopback is this is like very accessible. Like it's not, sure, there's a lot of stuff going on under the hood, but you can just really get in there and make changes, if you need to. And then the cat.js file there, and then I'm just about done. It also builds this file out for you, so you can do any sort of pre or post stuff you want to do. If you want to add a timestamp to your data before you send it to the database, you can do it in here or integrate third-party APIs, whatever the case may be. So yeah, that's like the super fast loopback demo. And you can get back to the slide if you want, closing slide. But what I love about it is that it's no worries. And these are all the things that I want to build. I have a whole list of APIs that I'm building, even like the seltzers that I like. But like my band's gigs and I want to buy a car, but none of the car buying apps are really that great in terms of like saving cars and comparing them. But so what I love about Loopback is like you can build something that fast. It's super easy with the CLI, but it's also very accessible to get in there and make changes and do whatever you need to do. It's built on top of Express, so you can, if you know Express, you can get in there and put in some middleware, whatever you may need. So while I feel like I'm sales pitching it, but it's open source, so it's like, go use it. It's so awesome. So yeah, that's my spiel. API all the things. Thank you. I don't know if we have time for questions. Okay, great. Someone over here?
Here, I'm going to run by and give you a microphone. So.
Oh, thanks.
Hello? Oh, there you go. We can hear you. Yeah. Thanks for that. That was awesome. That was like extremely quick.
Cool.
Just one quick question.
Yeah.
So is it possible to just say, I forgot what the command was, but strong loop init, skip all the questions and just give you the cat.json? You know what I mean? Like if you already know what you want and you could just give the JSON and then just do like, I don't know, a strong loop.init or...
That's a good question. I think that if you did just throw in those files, and maybe even the cat.js file, it probably checks that naturally. If you just had those files, it would probably just work.
Okay.
And if you
just to do like a quick bootstrap, like init, create, do the scaffolding for me, and then I could just give you the JSON.
Yeah. Oh, sure, for sure. Like the initial init, you could just run that and then drop in your files. You can even import a Swagger file and have. That was going to be my next question. Yeah. Yes. You can do that.
Because let's say you already have a project, you already have some of this, but you want to expand on it, and then so that this way you don't have to start fresh, but you could use this to build on what you already have, and then continue from there. Great.
Yeah. You can import a Swagger file. You can export Swagger. It's pretty versatile.
Nice.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. That's convenient.
Hey, first of all, thank you for the presentation. You talked about a lot, going to a bunch of these companies and seeing a lot of different, practices. Like you said, there was someone who was trying to do Agile in 2006 and things like that. I was wondering, are there any sort of like constants that you've seen that have worked well throughout these areas, constants that you've seen that have worked bad throughout all these areas, fads that tend to come up that don't really work, things like that?
That's a good question. As I mentioned, like leadership is really important, and it doesn't necessarily need to be like managers and, the people running the team, but just like people having good, strong leaders around the team or part of the team is really, I think, very important. I think especially in terms of like the agile thing, I've seen it like everywhere I went from Sears on, that it's sort of like, you make it work for what works for you. So I think being open and adaptable and flexible, I think is also an important thing, regardless of like methodologies or, what you're working on. Just being able to be flexible, I think is important.
Thank you.
Sure. Anyone else? I'll also point out that at Adobe and Behance, we had a Greenfield app, and the same thing happened. We're like, we're going to write this in Node. And when it came time to actually start writing it, they're like, oh, but we have all these PHP engineers. And so we wrote it in PHP, mostly PHP. And now they're working on, moving a bunch of it to Node too. So that's another common thread that I keep seeing, which is pretty interesting. Anyone else? No? Okay, thanks.